How's it going, guys? Just before we start today's episode, I just want to say a massive thank you for being here, for tuning in, having a listen, having a watch to the show. Truly makes a massive difference. And I just know you're going to come away from here with something just really good from this episode. However, I just want to say quickly that over the last couple of years doing this podcast, we have gone from 0 to 100 in this podcast with just the quality, the editing, the guest range. And that's been made possible by the amazing subscriber base who have just hit that subscribe button and just supported me on this journey. And I'm going to ask you if you could do the same today. If you enjoy this episode, please make sure to hit that subscribe button or a follow if you're on audio only. It truly makes more of a difference than you could ever imagine. And honestly, just every subscriber that goes into that number, it just contributes more to getting better and better guests on the show. So if you could just hit that subscribe button, or if you've already done that, maybe give it a share around or leave a rating and a review. It truly makes a massive difference to getting the show to the true vision I have for it. So guys, without further ado, let's get over to the episode and enjoy. Cheers. Mace, how you doing today? And welcome to the show.
I am good. Thanks for having me.
Absolute pleasure. And I figured, going into this podcast, I had to lay the apology out to start with. I'm very sorry about the enemy propaganda above my right shoulder right here. So figured I'd lead with the sorry for that one.
I saw that when you hopped on. For anyone that's not watching the video, the Blue Angels litho that is just like front and center on your cool wall of aviation stuff right behind you. I'm just gonna put a sticky note on my computer screen over it so I can't see it, and we'll be good to go.
Oh, brilliant. I love it. Yeah, you do that. Unfortunately, it came through a few weeks ago. And well, to be honest, me in the UK, it's a big honor. So I had to get it up there and hoping one day we can have get rid of the shelf here and stick a Thunderbirds one on the other side. That would be brilliant. But okay, let's have a quick kind of elevator pitch then. So you're an incredible person. I've followed you for ages. I've wanted you on the show for ages. But for the people listening in, just in kind of 30 to 60 seconds-ish, roughly, just a little bit about who you are, what your day job is, what you've done before, and just a little kind of intro into you. Hit it with the trailer.
Yeah, I'll give you the elevator pitch. So I am Michelle, also go by Mace, my call sign, like you mentioned. I spent 13 years flying the F16 in the Air Force. The last 3 years, I was a solo pilot for the Thunderbirds. So those last 2 years of my career, I was the lead solo. Did air shows all across the country and some international. I loved doing that so much, and the inspiration part of that mission, that about 2 years ago, I left active duty, started my own company as a motivational speaker, a children's author, a coach, basically became an entrepreneur with the goal to continue to inspire other people. And that's what I'm still doing now.
Yeah, well, you've clearly done a fantastic job of doing that. And I mean, we've probably got about an hour here or something, judging by the usual kind of podcast length. And I just cannot wait to dig into so much stuff with you. But obviously, the most kind of interesting bit to start with really would just have to be how this all came about for you then. So if we look at a bit of backstory, then just career like yours, I just want to know how it all started really. So, where did the passion for aviation come from? What really kind of inspired you? And maybe just walk us through a little bit of that initial entry into the Air Force and what got you into this line of work really.
Absolutely. So I kind of took a little bit of a circuitous path. I was not the kid at air shows as a child wanting to be a fighter pilot. I got asked that a lot while I was flying for the Thunderbirds. But I grew up in a small town in northern Wisconsin, not a military family, not an aviation family. So I just didn't really have exposure to that world at all. I was a really driven kid, high achiever, straight A student, also super adventurous, loved roller coasters, jumping off of things, all of that kind of stuff. But on the other hand, I was also very shy and introverted. So kind of an interesting combination there. As I got about halfway through high school, my parents were like, hey, you have great grades. We don't have a college fund for you. Let's talk about scholarship opportunities to pay for that. And eventually, after a lot of discussion, Air Force ROTC kind of rose to the top. I saw, the opportunity for an exciting career, to travel the world, to be part of a team, to get out of the small town I grew up in. And so it just made sense. So I applied for a scholarship, got one, went to college in St. Paul, Minnesota at the University of St. Thomas, but I was a criminal justice major because my plan was to graduate, do my 4 years in the Air Force on active duty, probably doing OSI, which is special investigations, get out, apply to the FBI Academy, and go do that. But then about halfway through college, we visited a base in Florida, and I had seen fighter jets from a distance a couple times, and they did always get me excited. But that was the first time I got to see them up really close from the ramp. Two F-15s taking off one after another at dusk, full afterburner. Vibrates your whole body. It's just deafening. And you get that orange afterburner flame against the darkening sky. It was just a visceral experience for me. I got goosebumps and I was like, all right, forget this whole FBI thing. I need to pay attention to this reaction and like, let's see if I can go do that. Let's at least give it a go. And so that's kind of where the seed, I had thought about it a little bit before that, but that was the moment where I was like, okay, I'm gonna have the courage to throw my name in the hat, start to tell people I do want to be a pilot, all the things. And there's quite the journey from deciding you want to be a fighter pilot to actually becoming one. Okay. And so that was, midpoint of college, competed for a pilot slot from ROTC when I graduated and commissioned, got one, went off to pilot training in Mississippi, went into that program with 0 civilian flight hours. Like I think I had ridden along in a Cessna one time at that point. So I was very much drinking from a fire hose. Like everything was new. Everything from how an airport works to talking on the radio to aerodynamics to oil system in the aircraft. Like I didn't understand any of it. So it was a very steep learning curve. Got over that, worked my butt off during that time, went to pilot training, and then after another really hard year of work, got the F16, which was my first choice of aircraft, and then went on to have, about 9 years, almost 10 years flying that aircraft after that. So there's a lot that happened between graduating pilot training and applying to the Thunderbirds, but that's kind of the Cliff Notes version. So my inspiration to fly was a little bit later than a lot of people expect.
Wow, brilliant. And so if we talk about the jet a little bit, was the F16 always that number one choice? And if, like you said, what was it about that jet particularly that made it that number one choice for you? And was there any kind of at that point then, I guess, was there any sort of slight sort of seed of thought towards maybe this could lead to a demo team or something in the future? Did you know it was possible when you're kind of applying and getting into the jet for the first time? Talk me through a bit about kind of the passion for it, and if you knew anything kind of about potential demo team stuff later on.
Yeah, so I saw F-15s that first inspired me. I go to pilot training just wanting to fly fighters, but not knowing specifically which one. During that year, you get the opportunity to learn a lot about the different airframes before you fill out your dream sheet where you list your preferences. And I kind of got hung up between the F-16 because I love the idea of maneuverable and small and fast and this afterburner and just tons of thrust for the size of the aircraft. And the other one that was a contender was the A-10 because I love the close air support mission. It seemed like it would be so rewarding to be the person that's airborne that can turn the tide for, friendly troops on the ground. And so I went back and forth between those two, which are, very, very different from each other. And eventually I put the F-16 first and the A-10 second. And that really came down to thinking back to that moment that inspired me to want to be a fighter pilot. And so much of that was around the speed and the sound and the flame of the afterburner. And I was like, okay, I want a jet engine that has, an AB. The F-16 is the one. And it's also multi-role. So you do get to do close air support. And that's what I got to do when I deployed. So I think I kind of got the best of both worlds there. So that's where the F-16 came into play. As far as demo teams, I had never been to an air show at that point. The first time I saw the Thunderbirds fly was when they came and did the air show at Columbus Air Force Base. And I don't think I had graduated yet. I think it was in between drop night where you find out which airframe you get and graduation when that happened. So I already knew I was going to fly the F-16 when they showed up. And I was like, oh, that's awesome. That's badass. Just watching the demo. But that was the first time I'd ever seen it. And honestly, I struggled with a lot of, being kind of reserved and shy. I struggled with a lot of self-doubt in that type A fighter pilot kind of environment. And so for the first 2/3 of my time in the jet, yes, there was intrigue around the demo teams, but it wasn't something I seriously thought about because I didn't really believe I had the skill to be part of that team.
Yeah.
That didn't come until I built my skill and my confidence much later. And so I didn't commit to it as a goal or a dream early on. And a lot of that came around, my own self-doubt.
Interesting. So if we look at going through that then, so I just think it's so interesting. But obviously, one of the you're doing so well right now with everything that you're doing and stuff. But obviously, one of the big highlights of that career is being in the Thunderbirds, which is just phenomenal. I mean, you look at the amount of pilots, the intake, and everything into the Air Force versus like the select few to get picked for that. It's obviously absolutely remarkable. So, being the only female fighter pilot on the team at that point, how does the opportunity kind of come about? Do you get selected? Are you handpicked? Do you apply? And what kind of criteria do you need to hit? Put us in your shoes a bit.
Yeah, so I did 3 years in a combat squadron in Misawa, Japan, my first unit. Then I went to Fort Worth, Texas, and did 3 years there. And my time in Texas was coming to an end. I already had a follow-on assignment to go to Holloman Air Force Base in New Mexico to the B course to train new F-16 pilots to be an instructor there. Just a couple months before I was supposed to move, I saw this email come through, and Air Force Personnel Center sends out all kinds of emails with different job opportunities. And I'll be honest, I usually didn't even read them because you kind of like knew what you were happening as a career path, and it was for all kinds of random stuff. And so I would generally just delete them. And I apparently had done that for these as well because this email was, hey, the Thunderbirds are hiring. Not only are they hiring, but applications are due next week. This is like your final warning if you want to apply, last
Wow.
chance. And surely they had sent out, several before that I just never even saw. So for whatever reason, I happened to have the free time at that moment that I open it, read it, and I'm like, oh, I meet all of these requirements because there's, an hour requirement and experience level that I hadn't really previously met. I was like, okay, A, I meet all of these requirements, and B, I'm finally at a point in my career where I might just believe in myself enough to give this a go, to throw my name in the hat. And so I went to my boss that day, my squadron commander, and he was just a great guy. And him and I had a pretty good working relationship, and we had done a lot of conversations where he, had mentored me. We talked about career development, next steps for my career, all that stuff. Never once had I mentioned wanting to go to the Thunderbirds. And meanwhile, I had this follow-on assignment that's just a few months away. Like they're already expecting me there. I go to him and I'm like, hey, sir. So I saw this email today. The Thunderbirds are hiring, applications are due in like a week. And I was very like non-committal about it. And he was like, Mace, do you want to apply to the Thunderbirds? And I was like, I think so. Like it wasn't like, yes, sir, all confident. It was just like, I think so. And that is a point that I identify now where there were like two forks of the future that could have happened. He could have said, hey, you should probably wait till next year. Holloman's already expecting you. We haven't really discussed this. Also, applications are due, in 5 business days. It's going to be tough to get that in. Or he could have said what he did, where he was like, I think you would be amazing for that team. What can I do to help you get your application in? And that's what he said. And that, A, logistically was helpful because we did have a short timeline, but B, that gave me just a little confidence boost that I needed to be like, okay, let's try this and see what happens. So I applied from there and got that application in, which is just all your records, letters of recommendation, a statement as to why you want to be on the team. Mine ended up being, I think, around 45 pages, so it's a lot. Send that in, and then you wait. And then I eventually found out that I was a semifinalist, and they were going to bring out 12 applicants to an air show weekend with the current team so that they could get to know you. They could do some interviews. You could see what the job really entails. And this is for 3 available spots, 2 in the demo, and then also the narrator and advanced pilot. Number 8 is also an F-16 pilot, but doesn't fly in the demonstration. So all 3 of those spots were hiring. So 12 of us go out. We do a whole weekend there. It's mostly informal, kind of just observing and them getting to know you and see if they could tolerate being on the road 240 days a year with your personality. And then from there, you go home and you wait. And then maybe like a month, 6 weeks, something like that goes by. And I find out that I'm a finalist. So now they bring 6 of us back out for another air show weekend for these 3 spots. This one is very similar to the first, but a little bit more formalities. There's a 12-person panel interview, the 12-man we call it, where the 12 current officers on the team all sit around this big boardroom table. You sit at the end and they all ask you questions. It's super stressful.
Oh my God, that sounds horrible.
Yeah, and I think honestly the anticipation of it was the worst part because it's, you and there's 5 other people, so there's 6 of you, and you're just like, all right, who's first? And they'll be like, you come with me, and you're like waiting, and they come back out, and you're like, how did it go? And they're just like, it was fine. You're like, I need more. Like, tell me, how did it go? Um, so I think, yeah, you kind of build it up in your head. It was stressful. The actual experience of the interview wasn't that bad. You interview with the wing commander, the squadron commander, Thunderbird 1. And then again, you go home and you wait. And I think it was like another 2 months before I got the call that I'd made the team. And then you find out also which position you're going to make. So they do ask you, like, hey, if you were to get hired, what would your first, second, and third choice be for the positions that are open? And you say that knowing that your preference only means so much, that it's really going to come down to who else is applying, where they think people would be a good fit, who they already have on the team, your experience, your background. It's this big puzzle of trying to put together the most effective 6 people possible. Sometimes that means your preference matters. Sometimes it means that you're going to get put into one of the positions that was second or third. I said I wanted to be a solo, and I got the call in July when I had submitted my application, I think in December of the previous year. Got the call in July, and not only had I made the team, but I was being hired as the posing solo number 6.
Cool. Quick ad break here, guys. Just want to introduce you to Shopify. Shopify is the all-in-one e-commerce platform that runs basically everything I'm doing, from my personal website to my business websites. It truly is a phenomenal system, and I have a way for you guys to get started today for just £1 building your business, whether that's personal brand, whether that's e-commerce, whether that's a blog. It has everything. It has its own app store that can get you basically every feature you could expect from an online store, and it really just works out of a fantastic all-in-one system, which I can only highly recommend enough. And you guys can start for just £1 today. It's an incredible offer. Absolutely amazing, and the link to that is in the bio, or I'll put it up in the tab at the top. I think it'll be top right at the screen for you guys right now. So yeah, guys, check it out. Make sure to get this offer, and yeah, get started. It's fantastic. Cool. So cool. Oh my God, that's amazing. I mean, if it was me in that position, I think for the first few days, if I got a ring on the phone, I'd literally dive bomb at my phone to pick up that call. But 2 months is a long time to have to wait. I mean, did you start to think towards the end of that, maybe it's come and gone, or what was it like when you finally got that call and picked up the phone? What did they say?
It was stressful waiting. I mean, I could be okay with the amount of time it was taking to make the decision, but what was hard for me is I was supposed to be moving to this new base to Holloman. And so my squadron there was like emailing me, calling me, being like, hey, have you scheduled your household goods to get shipped? Do you have your orders? All this stuff. And I was kind of like trying to walk this line of doing the stuff I needed to for them, but really hoping that I wasn't going to be going there, that I was going to Vegas for the Thunderbird assignment. And so deadlines were coming up that I needed to make happen for this move to my new base. But in my heart, I was like, this isn't actually happening. I'm going to get hired. I was like, I'm pretty sure I'm going to get hired. Everything had gone really well. I was like, I feel like there's a really good chance. And so it was kind of trying to balance those two things was stressful. And then when I did get the call, the executive officer for the team, who does they're really the glue that holds the squadron together administratively, a fellow captain, her number popped up on my phone, and I had her in my contacts, so I knew who it was. And I was actually out on the flight line, just about to drive off the ramp. I had just done a runway check because I was the supervisor of flying that day. And one of the things you do is go out and drive the runway and just visually inspect it before the first jets of the day start taxiing, just to make sure there's nothing on the runway like rocks or nothing's happened overnight. You'd find all kinds of weird stuff that had blowing onto the runway overnight or whatever it was. So I just done that. I'm driving the truck with like the yellow light on the roof about to get off the airfield. And I see my phone ringing as I'm like not in the controlled area, luckily, but I'm on the ramp still. And so I just like pull over, put my flashers on, and I answer it. And as soon as I answered, I was on speakerphone and it was just all of the current officers, 12 of them, yelling congratulations at the same time. So it was very obvious there was good news as soon as I answered the phone.
Oh, that's so cool. Wow. What a place for it as well. Not exactly like you're just sitting at home chilling either, right?
Yeah, and I drove back into the squadron and I walked in and I was part of a reserve squadron then as an active duty person. And the reserves are a lot more laid back and they tend to give the Thunderbirds a hard time. Like they they see the value in the team and they admire, but they like to like give little jabs at the team. And it's a bunch of like older, more like super experienced fighter pilots. And I walk in and like the first person I see, I'm just like, I made the Thunderbirds. And I just started telling everyone. And people were like really excited for me, but I had a little bit of reservation. I was like, I need to tame this down because they're going to be like, okay, whoa, calm down. But for that rest of that work day, I was just like floating around the squadron, just telling anyone that would
Yeah.
listen. Uh, and then I calmed down after that. But they gave me the grace of one day of just not shutting up about it.
Oh, that's brilliant. I mean, congratulations to you. I mean, what an amazing story that is. So, what happened then? So you got the call, opposing solo. What happens then? And a little bit kind of about you then too, because from kind of what I've heard and watching your content and stuff, one of the things you talk a lot about is self-confidence. And um, how did you feel? Like you to you, did you feel like this was going to go well? Were you struggling a little bit with the thought of it? And kind of what was the training like? And what was that adaptation for you, like personally as well?
Some of all of the above. So during my first combat squadron in Japan, I really struggled with just finding my identity in the fighter pilot culture. And part of that was, not looking like anyone else in my squadron. That's definitely a thing that can affect your confidence and just how you show up. But you're new and it's a difficult job. And so there's this time frame where you just suck at everything. And I think that's true for every new fighter pilot. But I had always been that high achiever that had done well at things. And even in pilot training, coming with no flight time, it's very structured. It's very much like, here's the syllabus, here's a test you'll take, and here's the simulator you'll do, and then you're gonna fly, and this is the standard you need to meet. And I worked really well in that environment. And I was able to kind of just focus on the task at hand, put in a ton of work. I was good at studying and memorization. And I did well in that environment. And then I went to a combat squadron, and now I'm no longer part of a class, all going through that together where we can study together, we can go in sims and work like practice and all of that. I, show up by myself to a new unit where there are other pilots that are younger and fairly new, but I'm the only brand new person. And so it was very intimidating. I'm also living in a foreign country that's just so different than anything I know, right? Japan is much different than a small town Wisconsin or my first assignment in Columbus, Mississippi. And there was just this time frame of feeling like an imposter, feeling in over my head, doubting if I even had the ability to meet the standards that I saw I needed to meet to like really learn the tactics and be good at them. In hindsight, I was doing fine, but at that point, I like just really got in my own head and struggled. I get to Texas and now I'm more experienced. I kind of made this decision as I moved from Japan to Fort Worth that how I was viewing myself in relation to the fighter pilot culture, how I was viewing myself as a capable fighter pilot was just not sustainable. Like I needed to really take a hard look at those things and figure out what I could change about my thoughts and behaviors to thrive in this environment instead of just survive in it. And that came down to really pushing myself to do things where I did feel uncomfortable, where I did feel a little bit of doubt, and still just go physically do the thing. And I started to do that in a lot of ways as I got to Texas. And over time, over about a year and a half period, I just was proven again and again that I actually could do that thing that felt uncomfortable. And I became an instructor pilot during that time. I got to deploy for the first time. I got to fly in Poland for a few months, which was very much outside my comfort zone, but ended up being amazing. And kind of all of these new challenging things where I did have those moments of self-doubt, but still went forward and didn't let it stop me. And then did fine. Like the world did not end. Everything went fine. I mean, there were hard things and I learned from it, but I was like, okay, I've demonstrated to myself that I am capable. And that's what really builds your confidence over time, right? Is proving to yourself that you can do those things. So that had all happened. And so as I get to the Thunderbirds, of course I have that feeling of apprehension. It's a whole new kind of flying. You're very much under the microscope, and not only among your peers on the team, but the public in general is just watching, right? And now you're a public figure and there's all this pressure on you. And it's kind of amplified when you are a female pilot because there's just not that many of us. And so, from the public's perspective, you are exciting and new and you stick out and you get a lot of extra eyes on you. And so, when it came to the flying, it was just so different than any flying I had done that training season when I first showed up there, I had to go back to being a beginner. Like I had to consciously adopt a beginner's mindset and just recognize that even though I was an experienced fighter pilot with about 1,000 hours at that point, that I was just going to be bad at the maneuvers for several months. I was going to be bad at them. And it was actually really helpful how the second year pilots on the team who are the instructors, they kind of lay that out for you right out the gate. They're like, hey, FYI, I know you're good at this now, but this new type of flying, you're going to suck. And like, don't get in your own head. It'll come. It just takes a lot of repetition. And so I quickly overcame the feeling of not being good enough for the flying. I would say what I struggled with a little bit more on the team was feeling like I was living up to being the ideal Thunderbird and not in the cockpit, but outside of it. What we call Thunderbirding, like the public affairs events, the on camera stuff, the interactions with people, whether that's a cute little kid who's very easy to have a positive interaction with, or it's like a creepy person that's like super close talker and just monopolizes your time and won't go away, which happened fairly often, especially in my role. And you have to be on and friendly and outgoing and be the face of the Air Force in both of those situations. And it can be very tasking on your energy level. It can be extremely rewarding, but it can also be very hard. And so I would say I struggled with that part of the job. Like I mentioned, I'm more introverted. I don't thrive in extroversion and constantly interacting with people. I enjoy it while I'm doing it, but I also find it very tiring. And so figuring out how to balance my energy in those types of situations, which were happening all of the time, was honestly the bigger challenge than learning to fly the maneuvers.
Yeah, I get you. I get you. I think some people, myself included, call that like the social battery. Like you spend, if you're
Yeah.
kind of introverted naturally, spending a lot of time extroverted, you're kind of draining that battery, right? You need time to recharge. But something like the Thunderbird schedule, I can imagine it's just so full on all the time. You've got to kind of represent this figure all the time and stuff.
Yep.
But I think it's a really interesting point to touch on actually quickly. So I think everyone who I love this quote. Probably going to butcher it, but it's about basically, when you feel discomfort in something that you're doing in life, it's a sign that you're growing or you're pushing the boundaries and stuff. And we've all got to do it. So loads of people listening in have done that in their past, and they're probably going to do that in their future too, or definitely going to do that in their future. But if you're in a situation where, an opportunity's come knocking and you've got the job offer, or you've got some kind of an opportunity for a sponsorship in a sports team, or you land the best podcast guest in the world, or I don't know, just any kind of situation where you may feel a little bit like, hey, I'm a bit kind of in over my head here. I feel like I'm kind of surrounded by giants. I feel small. I'm trying to live up to something that these people just seem to be cruising at and kind of struggling. What's your kind of like approach to managing all of that? Because obviously, like you said, I think a lot of the success in that situation comes from doing the thing, right? And then getting used to it and realizing you're actually as capable as you or more capable than you thought you were. But that initial kind of period of feeling like you're, a pawn, on the chessboard surrounded by knights and rooks and stuff. How do you, manage that and keep going forward without sort of crawling back into your shell a bit,
Yeah, my view on that has changed very much. Early in my career, I let that dictate what I did and didn't do. If I didn't feel comfortable and ready and prepared, I was just not going to do it. Later on in my career and doing what I'm doing now, I usually recognize like that physical feeling, that pit in your stomach, that apprehensive feeling. And I'm like, okay, let me take a step back here for a second, like zoom out, look at it from a 30,000 foot view and be like, is this thing that I want to go, well, A, do I want to go do the thing that, I'm feeling apprehensive about? Does it serve my long-term goals? If I don't do it, will I regret not giving it a go 6 months or a year from now? What's the worst thing that could happen if I do try this? And a lot of times just asking yourself a few questions like that really gives you the perspective to realize like, yeah, I'm feeling that way because we're wired to stay safe. Like our bodies try to avoid things that feel uncertain and uncomfortable because that used to be associated with physical danger, if you go back to like being cavemen. But now a lot of times we let that feeling get in our way of doing things where the risk is really not that high and rewards could drastically overshadow what the risk is, but we can lose perspective on weighing those two things when we're kind of consumed by that feeling of apprehension. And so just gaining that perspective and then honestly just forcing yourself to take the first step forward, even if it's something tiny, and focusing on that rather than the whole daunting task gives you something manageable to deal with. And once you do that small step and you realize you were fine, then you can do the next one. And again, each time you do that, it builds that confidence. And so when I give keynotes, like one of the things I drive home to people is that all of those successful people that you admire, they aren't necessarily smarter than you or more talented than you. They've just had the courage to start. And I guarantee that they did not feel 100% ready when they started either. And so realizing that that's a normal feeling when you're trying something new, when you're going to be a beginner, that uncertainty is something everyone experiences, even those people you admire. And I think that just normalizes it and can really empower people to be like, okay, I feel this because this is big. Like there's high stakes here, but that means there's high rewards as well. And I can be uncomfortable and it can be okay. Like it's fine to feel uncomfortable. And in fact, that's inherent in those things that push us and grow us, like you said.
Yeah. Second, to introduce you to a brand called Aviate. Aviate are an incredible aviation-inspired watch brand, which make fantastic, as I said, aviation-inspired watches with different themes, all with a bit of history attached to them too, and just certain designs which have certain themes, which just look phenomenal and really commemorate certain bits of legendary aviation history. So I highly recommend you check them out. And they are kind enough to have given us a discount for this show. So if you do see something that particularly calls to you, if there's a piece of history there that you think, hey, I really like this, and this watch commemorates that perfectly, go and check them out. And please use the code Skupien20 for a meaty 20% off any full price watch at Aviate. Guys, going to take you back over to the episode now. I know you're enjoying it, so see you there. Yeah, absolutely. That quote, everyone's kind of heard it, but a journey of 1,000 miles begins with a single step. And
Yep.
I think maybe we brush over that just slightly, because actually the truth is that journey of 1,000 miles is 1,000 miles worth of little steps, isn't it? If you think I'm going to go and take the journey of 1,000 miles, then you're probably not going to do it because it's 1,000 miles, right? But if you can manage that step-by-step thing, yep, and set those goals and everything, then it makes a massive, massive difference to achieving those things. And like you said, if you feel the pressure, then it's probably a great sign that you're doing something worthy and you're pushing what you would consider to be normal life, I imagine. Hey.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, in terms of actionable stuff, which we're onto right now with the Thunderbirds and everything, I think it's so interesting because in the demo teams we've spoken to before, we've gone into some of the things that they get up to on a day-to-day basis individually within the team that just cultivate that professional environment, that elevate, the professionalism of the team and ultimately lead to better performance and stuff. So in terms of the things that you guys were doing in the professional landscape of things, which had the biggest kind of impacts on, keeping the performance and quality high of the team and also yourself individually too. What were some of those things that you think the team were doing and you were doing personally that were helping you the most in terms of like routines, habits, pre and post flight stuff, PR that were just making the biggest difference in terms of just keeping that standard as high as it was and is?
Yeah, the when people would ask me what the hardest part about the Thunderbird job was, they would usually ask like, "Hey, what's the best part? What's the hardest part?" The hardest part was the schedule and being on the road 240 days a year away from your family and with the same people all the time, changing time zones, flying jets cross country, the demands of flying an air show physically on your body, but then also the demands of knowing that that's a high repercussion environment where you can't have an off day, right? Like bad things happen when you have off days. So doing that for 9 months of the year, you could see the team kind of go through this arc of show season kicks off in March or April, and it's exciting because you've worked for 4+ months flying a ton, learning all these new maneuvers, bringing in the new people to the team, getting them up to standards. You do the Daytona 500 flyover, and it's like your public debut, and that's just a fun environment. And then air shows start, and the energy is high, morale is high. People are very vigilant as well because the team is new. And so there's no complacency. People are very much by the book. Standards are met. Then you see the team start to get tired as you get into like the second half of this season. So late summer. You've been on the road a lot. Fatigue is just generally setting in from that. People are pretty good at the flying side of things. So that's where complacency starts to sneak in. And that's where standards can start to slip a little bit. And it could be like a slippery slope, like one minor little deviation, it's not a big deal, but then that becomes the norm. And then you get a little deviation from that. And so you can quickly find yourself away from, where you started and what the goal should be. And so I think habits and routines and standards are what the team like lives and dies by in that environment. So they're set very early on. Everyone is read into them. It's made very clear that this is what the standard we're going to live up to, and here's why. Here's the bigger mission we're part of. We're representing the U.S. Air Force. We're representing the U.S. military. In international cases, we are literally representing the United States of America. Like there's a lot of pressure behind this uniform, this patch, this team name beyond you as an individual and being tired and missing your dog. Like there's a bigger picture here. And that creates kind of this culture where people are really good about self-policing. And so it doesn't all come down to Thunderbird 1, who we call the boss, enforcing standards. There's 120 people, 130 people really on the Thunderbird team. So you see the pilots, but there's a whole big support network behind that. And all those people have to be meeting those standards. And so they're really good because that groundwork of culture is laid at the beginning of the year. They're really good at correcting each other and not letting things kind of just disintegrate over time. And for me as an individual, man, I was not good at this my first year. Second year was COVID. It was just weird. By my third year, I had it figured out. I had to figure out what routines I had to kind of religiously adhere to on the road, even when there were constant temptations to set them aside and go do cool opportunities that would pop up. And for me, that became focused around getting my workouts in. It came around eating healthy, which is tough to do when you're traveling. So I had to, I'd actually bring meal prep meals with me in a cooler on the C-17.
Nice.
And then I would get them once I landed in the F-16, take them to the hotel, send my empty cooler back at the end of the weekend. That required some extra planning and logistical work, but I felt so much better when it was that instead of just like, we got to swing by a gas station I haven't eaten all day, or what barbecue is this air show serving? Like, guess that'll work. So that was a huge thing. Sleep was a big priority. And then for me on Sunday nights, I kind of developed this routine of just staying at the hotel, ordering food for delivery, and just chilling out before we packed up and left again on Monday. And a lot of times there would be cool opportunities on Sunday night. The show would be like, oh, we have this 5-star restaurant we want to host you at. Or, oh, there's this concert and we got you backstage passes. Or, oh, you can go tour this unique thing. Like that stuff kind of gets thrown in front of you a lot when you're on the road. And I just had to remind myself that it wasn't worth it, that I had to like preserve my time to myself, to recharge my social battery, to get rest, to get sleep. And becoming fairly strict about those things allowed me to show up so much better for all those interactions I mentioned earlier. That allowed me to show up and be the Thunderbird that people expected, one that I could be proud of. And I was able to do that without feeling like I was, on the verge of burnout constantly. So that was a long answer. And it took me, 2+ years in that job to really figure it out. But it became just the thing that made the third year a lot of fun.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. I mean, it's just I just find it so interesting because you talk about the meal prep and stuff and the diet and things like that, and I guess in the UK here I know people who view like our Red Arrows display team as heroic and something above just like the ordinary person, which obviously they are, but it's funny how like I'm doing some PT work right now. I've got a couple of clients and I'm getting them to do meal prep now. They're kind of their work rate and their diet and the stuff that the weight they're losing, it's made such a big difference to them. And it's funny how like even on the kind of the small level, like going to the gym and your workouts versus as well like something like flying the F16 and the Thunderbirds, it's those same kind of practices and principles that all apply to the same way. Like if you can prep and be on top of your preparation and diet and your workouts, you're probably gonna excel at what you're trying to do out there. But I think the one thing that I'm really interested in is what it would be like to be, the old guy in a gas station somewhere in the middle of the desert or something, and then the Thunderbirds walk in picking up some food. That's pretty crazy.
That happened on a regular basis. And people, I think, they see us when we're on and we're, at attention, flying the jet, doing the meet and greets. And then we're just normal people when we're not, right? And so I just imagine us rolling into gas stations, which happened all the time, and people grabbing stuff that they would think that we didn't eat, like candy or energy drinks, and just like kind of like BSing, giving each other a hard time, joking around. Like we're just a normal group of peers that were friends a lot of the time. But you just turn it on when it's time, when it's go time, you're focused on that. But I think a lot of times people will be like, oh, they're just like regular people. Weird. I thought they would be robots all the time.
Yeah, no, I guess so. Like when you see the videos of social media and stuff, it's also formal, right? It's actually sometimes hard to imagine that there's a normal people in there sometimes too. But absolutely, that's it's a very interesting way of looking at it too, because you can be that professional on the job too, and you can still be professional outside of it, but you can still be human, I guess, can't you? Outside of doing something like that as well.
Yeah, and I think that's why people connected with me on social media while I was on the team. There was no agenda on my part. I just, the team was kind of like, yeah, we want you to be active on social media. Like we want you to help grow the Thunderbird brand. And I was like, I'm just gonna be me on social media, and this is part of it. But I also shared normal human stuff, right? Like meeting my husband and getting a dog and what I'm doing now and workouts and like I would say stuff that was funny or whatever, and they would be like, "Oh, this is cool because I see myself in you in like different ways." And it makes something that can feel so formal and so like untouchable, it makes it relatable. And I think when you can make it relatable, it can inspire a lot of people to feel like it's achievable, whether it's like actually flying for the Thunderbirds or some other big thing that just feels like a dang near impossible goal, suddenly can feel like it's something within reach. And so I really enjoyed being relatable for people, for the general public, and not just being, locked in,
Yeah.
really tight flight suit.
Guys, just to let you know, Talk4 podcast is on Patreon and it also has a Spotify subscription too. So, guys, if you are really enjoying the show and you enjoy all the past episodes too, and you just want to pitch in just a tiny amount every month, even just a couple of pounds a month or something to support the show, help me get better guests on and keep upgrading and upgrading and upgrading what we're doing here, please do consider heading over there and just giving me some support. It means a massive amount. Guys, back to the episode now. Enjoy. Yeah, I agree. I think because, I was a professional tennis player for a number of years, and I always said to people, one of my favorite players was a guy called Dominic Thiem. He's an Austrian guy. Unfortunately, he's retired now. But I think when you looked at the top percent of those tennis players on the world tour, like, the Federers, Nadals, the Murrays, the Djokovic's, these people, and how just literally unfaltering they were every single match, every tournament for just years in a row, it almost made you know, it was so admirable. It almost made it seem slightly more like this might not be attainable. It might not be for me, because here's me, you know, playing in the UK or kind of internationally a few times and everything. And, you know, I'm losing second round. I'm having like terrible matches. And then you look up to these guys and these people, and they're like perfect every single time. And then, you know, there's this guy who, you know, like I said, Dominic Thiem, and I just loved how he played because he had that potential all the time. Like he won, you know, the Grand Slams, and I was a fan of him for quite a while, so I got to see him build his way up to winning that Grand Slam, beating one of those top players. But along the way, like the guy had so many bad matches and so many bad performances, and it made it feel so much more relatable as well. Not saying that's obviously what happened with the Thunderbirds, but it's just nice to be able to see that people are actually human, but they do have that potential and that capability of being so professional that they can achieve that standard without being like a robot and literally getting it perfect every time. So I feel like that's really important. But on that kind of note, before we kind of get into what you're doing now and stuff, when did you first get that quote unquote like the perfect flight, you know, in the Thunderbirds? So, you know, if you tell a little story of like a cool flight or something, but when was the first time you said, kind of like going through your training and stuff, you sucked at first, like you said, when did you feel like you got it perfect? How did it feel? Give us a cool flight story. Then we're going to talk about what you're up to now.
Perfect, never. There isn't a perfect flight in that environment, honestly, because you are literally targeting an exact altitude, an exact airspeed, an exact timing down to the split second, exact formation, you know, 2 feet away or 3 feet away from another airplane. But the way the F-16 flies, it's very unstable. So you're bouncing around all the time. You're constantly correcting deviations. And so I think all of us knew like we never had a perfect flight. But that being said, there were definitely flights where it felt like we were all firing on all cylinders and it felt like easy compared to others. And so I think that's what I would answer with. And for me, I mean, there were specific maneuvers that I struggled with for even most of my first air show season. And I think one of the reasons I really love the Huntington Beach Air Show, which is usually the first weekend of October, is because, you know, we've been flying the show season since March at that point, and things were really together by then. In October as well, the show season ends in November, so you're starting to kind of see that light at the end of what is a grind. And so it's like the perfect time of the year where morale is ticking back up from kind of like the slump in the middle of the summer, but you're also very good at what you do. And Huntington Beach has really great weather. And so I do remember my first air show season, like that our Saturday show at Huntington Beach. You know, we do two Saturday and Sunday. So the first one, everything just felt awesome. And there were a million people that saw that show throughout that weekend. So there was a huge crowd on the ground. It's over the Pacific Ocean. It was sunny. It wasn't windy. It wasn't turbulent. You know, the air is smooth. And I just remember we landed and everyone was like, that was a good demo. Like, good job, everyone. Like, let's do it again tomorrow.
Nice.
And that happened here and there, but I think that was the first one that just stuck out in my mind as like, wow, that's what it could be like. What if it was like that every time? Which it won't be, because there's show sites where the weather sucks, it's bumpy, the terrain's uneven, and you're just, you know, working with some conditions that are not ideal. But man, everything came together for that show in 2019.
Nice. So something I've just thought of now that I'd love to quickly ask about is something I haven't actually asked anyone kind of fighter pilot-esque before on the podcast. We've kind of spoken a lot about the pre-flights, the post-flights, and the kind of, you know, the routines, the habits and stuff, but I'm just genuinely really curious. So you've got one pair of eyes, you've got, like you said, you're managing so many different things. You're managing your airspeed, you're managing height, you're managing the people around you, the communications, you know, the bumpy, you know, unstable flight, and the air show. There's You can only keep your eyes on one thing at a time. Obviously you can dart around a bit and stuff, but you got to deal with one thing at a time. And you know, when you're flying feet away from other people, you know, it's very, very dangerous stuff. So I just want to know, where does your head go during that? Like, what is the kind of the mental zone? Like, you know, people talk about the zone, right? They talk about, I'm in the zone. What does that look like in that situation? Like, are you thinking consciously about a lot of the stuff? are you ingrained so much into that technique that it's kind of second nature? And, what are you kind of thinking during all of that? Or are you thinking at all? You just kind of trying to, yeah, what does the zone look
Yeah.
like during that?
I think it evolves over time depending on your proficiency level. So earlier in a show season or earlier in my Thunderbird career, it would very much be super methodical, and I would be very, very focused on the next thing. If I'm flying a maneuver as I'm turning down to the show line, it comes down to that cross check that you mentioned, like where your eyes look when. That becomes second nature and muscle memory. So your brain just knows where to look when. And when you hadn't flown for a while, that would feel rusty and you would feel slow and sluggish. And it was a lot of work to make things happen. When you were really proficient, your eyes just would go and your brain would process what it needed to when it needed to, like at the appropriate times. And it was so much easier. But I would be taking the show line and I would be like out loud, even I would be reciting, all right, 450, 3.9. Like I would be saying the different numbers of like the airspeed, my timing, the range from show center that I need to move the jet to action to do the rolls or to flip inverted or whatever it was. I would be repeating those. I'd be like, okay, all right, smoke on. Blah, blah, blah. Like I would be saying it because it was just all my focus was going into that. As I got more experience and became really proficient, that became more subconscious, where you could be more relaxed and like you would just know what to do when, and it felt like you didn't have to be quite as vigilant. But then there's this risk of complacency coming in. So I got to the point, late in one of the show seasons where I'm in Delta formation, all six jets close together, and I'm flying either the loop or the roll, which was always a challenge as the solo pilot because you're on the outside of the formation. So you're at the end of the whip. So there's a lot of movement. You're always fighting for your position. And I realized in the middle of that maneuver that I was thinking about what I was going to do that night and what I was going to have for dinner. And then I recognized that I was doing that. I was like, oh shit, like this is complacency at its finest. Like you cannot be letting your mind drift while you're in this high risk environment, 3 feet away from another airplane, making all these corrections constantly. And so it evolves over time based on your proficiency. But I think there's a sweet spot where you're good, you're good at the skill. It's kind of muscle memory. It can be a lot of things can be taken off your conscious focus and be done subconsciously so you don't feel that task overload, but you're not so comfortable that you start to get complacent. And so we try to operate in that zone as much as possible, but it takes a lot of effort.
Yeah, absolutely. So what are you up to now then? So you put the flight suit down after 13 years. What was it like to leave all of this behind you, all the flying, all the, the team and everything? And just talk to us a bit about what you're doing now. Obviously, for the video watchers right now, you can see, the books above you and everything. So how did that kind of come about? What was the idea behind that? And just kind of talk a bit about the impact you're having with it too.
Yeah, so after my third show season, my time on the Thunderbirds was done anyway. Normally it's a 2-year gig. We got 3 years because of the pandemic. I knew I was going to leave active duty for several reasons. My body was really beat up. I was in constant back pain from pulling high Gs as often as I did with the solo profile that I flew. I'd also met my husband at the beginning of that assignment. I have a stepson now. And so moving every few years just wasn't in the cards anymore. And then, at some point during my Thunderbird career, the cool flying became, still a cool thing, but my favorite part of the job became those inspirational, impactful moments I got to have with people. And I loved doing that so much. And people seemed to get so much good from it that I wanted to figure out a way to continue to do that. And so I had been asked to speak a few times while I was on the team, and I couldn't do it at that time. But then I got asked to speak it was like 6 or 8 months in the future, and it was after I would be off of active duty. And I was considering a few different jobs at that point: the airlines, tech sales for a drone company. Like I was just looking at different options. And so I was like, yeah, like I'll speak at this thing. I figured out rates and all that stuff, and I was like, wait a minute, what if I could make a whole business out of doing this type of thing? And I just knew nothing about the speaking world. So as I started to do some research, I realized just how big of an industry it is. Like there's a lot of opportunity there. You've got to be good at getting on stage and talking, which I had to close that gap with some training. Not naturally good at that. But I just felt like it was one of those things that felt uncomfortable and apprehensive, but also felt so exciting. And much like seeing those two jets take off when I was in college, it felt like a moment I needed to at least give a go. And so
Yeah.
the companies I've been talking to, I was like, thanks, but no thanks. I'm going to start my own business. And here we go. And so the speaking really has been the main pillar of the business. I did, 40 keynotes last year. I've gotten to speak to some amazing companies, a lot of Fortune 100 and Fortune 500 companies, just some great audiences. And then the kids' books, I wrote the kids' book, the first one, Upside Down Dreams. I wrote that manuscript while I was on the Thunderbirds during the pandemic. I had no idea how to actually get it published. Pitched it a bunch to literary agents while I was still on the team. Everyone said no thanks or didn't reply at all. Turns out that's what happens when you're an unknown author. And most of them have no idea who the Thunderbirds are. So I was like, oh, okay, this is going to be different than I imagined. As I was leaving the Air Force, I got connected with a small publisher. They loved it, and we went forward from there. And so, Upside Down Dreams, kids' picture book about a little girl that wants to be a fighter pilot, came out last June. And then the second one with the same character, Lily Padilli, she's back in What's Your Call Sign this year, and that centers around fighter pilot call signs and them sounding cool, but them coming from generally a mistake that you made. And so she makes a mistake, gets a nickname at school that she's like embarrassed by and feels bad about. But her grandpa, who's a former fighter pilot, he's also in the first book. He's like, oh, let me tell you about fighter pilot call signs. And so it kind of changes her perspective on this name, changes her perspective on failure and how we overcome it. And so there's a lot of great lessons for kids to learn in the books. But those have been a total passion project. It's been really cool to see kids' responses to them. And there's a third one that'll come out next year. It'll be a 3-book series. And then I'm doing a little bit of coaching. I have a virtual course called the Badass Masterclass, where I took the time to think about that journey that we've discussed today, self-doubt, imposter syndrome, overcoming that, doing things that people say are badass. And like, how did that happen? Because I feel like I'm just a normal person. I just worked really hard at a specific thing. And so I came up with some actual like actionable curriculum that other people could use, and created a course around it. And I just ran my first cohort of that with about 50 people, and the feedback has been amazing. And so
Great.
we'll see where that goes. I'm just building and having fun and excited, and it's rewarding. And I don't know how it'll evolve over the next few years, but I'm just having a blast doing it.
I can tell. I think that's so important too. Like, obviously your career is just phenomenal so far, but it's clear that it's no flash in the pan. Like the Thunderbirds getting into the Air Force, flying jets, that was just one stage of your journey, and you're just pushing on with it. So it's so good to see. And on that note, then, so kind of shameless plug. So where can we find all this then? So we've done the 4 questions, but in terms of links, social media, that group, send our people to go and investigate more. I guess I'd love to find out more.
Yeah, for everyone that is on Instagram, I'm just Mace_Curran, and I pretty much share all the things I'm doing there. So any updates can be found there. Michelle Mace Curran on LinkedIn for people that are there. I share a lot of like thought leadership stuff around teams, around business, around self-empowerment. Macecurran.com is my website. You can find book info. We're just going to get the course up and running again so that people can give that a go. So that'll be announced on social media as that happens. But honestly, Instagram or LinkedIn, I pretty much share most things there. So those are the best spots to stay up to date.
Brilliant. Mace, well, thank you so much for joining me today for the Talk4 podcast. Honestly, absolute pleasure having you on. I'm glad we finally got to be able to do this. I finally got the message through to you, and it's just been an absolute blast. Thank you so much.
Absolutely. Thanks for having me.
Anytime. And thank you guys for listening to this. Has been episode 116. And if you'd like to listen to the past episodes, go and have a look at the channel. And if you'd like to listen in for the future ones too, make sure to hit the subscribe button and spread some love by leaving a like and a comment. Signing off for now. See you next time. Fights on.